The village of Bran had long lived under the shadow of the castle. Perched atop the jagged cliffs like a crown of blackened stone, it watched over the valley with the silent menace of a sleeping dragon. The peasants spoke of it only in whispers, their voices trembling when the wind carried the distant howling of wolves down from those ancient walls. They knew the stories. Every child raised in these mountains learned them before they could walk. The castle belonged to Count Dracula, and Count Dracula belonged to darkness itself. Elena had heard these stories all her life, 23 years of warnings, of prayers muttered at dusk, of mothers clutching their children close when the moon rose full and pale. She had believed them, feared them, respected them, but fear, she had learned, was a luxury afforded only to those with full bellies and warm hearths. The winter had been merciless. Her father had died of fever in November, her mother following him into the frozen earth barely a month later. The small plot of land they had worked for generations yielded nothing but stones and frost. Her younger brother, only 9 years old, grew thinner each day, his eyes sunken and haunted. The village could offer no help. Everyone was starving. Everyone was dying. The priest spoke of God's will and the promise of heaven, but heaven was a distant hope, and hunger was an immediate agony. Elena stood at the edge of the forest, staring up at the winding path that led to the castle. The February wind bit through her threadbare shawl, and her breath misted in the twilight air. Behind her the village lights flickered weakly, small and fragile against the encroaching night. Before her, the path vanished into shadows so deep they seemed solid, impenetrable. She clutched the small bundle in her hands, the last loaf of bread she had managed to bake from their final handful of grain. It was meant for her brother, but she knew it would not be enough. Nothing would ever be enough unless she found another way. The stories said that Count Dracula was a monster, a creature of unholy appetites who drank the blood of the living and commanded the beasts of the night. The stories said he had made a pact with the devil himself, trading his soul for immortal power. The stories said that those who entered his castle never returned, but the stories also said he was once a man, a nobleman, a lord who had ruled these lands with wisdom and strength before the curse took him. And if he had once been a man, then perhaps somewhere beneath the monster, a fragment of that humanity remained. Elena took a step forward, then another. The path was steep and treacherous, lined with twisted trees that seemed to reach for her with skeletal branches. An owl hooted somewhere in the darkness, its cry mournful and strange. She thought of her brother's face, pale and trusting, waiting for her in their cold cottage. She thought of her mother's final words, "Protect him, Elena, no matter what it costs." The climb took hours. The moon rose higher, a perfect silver disk that bathed the landscape in ghostly light. Wolves howled in the distance, their voices rising and falling in eerie harmony. Once she thought she saw eyes watching her from the undergrowth, yellow and gleaming, but when she looked directly at them, there was nothing but shadow. Finally, the path leveled and she found herself standing before the castle gates. They were massive, wrought from black iron, twisted into intricate patterns of roses and thorns. Beyond them, a courtyard stretched silent and empty, leading to the castle proper, a towering structure of dark stone and pointed spires that seemed to pierce the very sky. Every window was dark, except one, high in the central tower, where a single candle flickered like a watching eye. Elena reached out with trembling fingers and pushed against the gate. It swung open without a sound, as if it had been expecting her. The courtyard was paved with ancient cobblestones, each one worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Statues stood at intervals along the path, figures of warriors and maidens, their faces eroded by time and weather until they seemed more like ghosts than stone. A fountain stood at the center, its water long since frozen, its basin filled with snow that gleamed like crushed diamonds in the moonlight. She walked forward, her footsteps the only sound in the oppressive silence. The castle doors stood before her now, carved from dark wood and bound with iron. There was no knocker, no bell, no way to announce herself. For a long moment she simply stood there, gathering what remained of her courage. Then the doors opened. They moved slowly, ponderously, revealing a vast entrance hall lit by dozens of candles. The flames burned without flickering, their light steady and cold. A grand staircase swept upward into shadow, its railings carved with more roses and thorns. Tapestries hung on the walls, depicting scenes of battles and hunts, their colors faded but still rich, crimson and gold and deep, midnight blue. And at the foot of the stairs stood a figure. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in black clothing that seemed to absorb the candlelight. His face was pale, almost luminous, with sharp aristocratic features and eyes so dark they appeared to have no pupils at all. His hair was long and black, pulled back from his face, revealing the elegant, predatory lines of his skull. He did not smile. He did not move. He simply watched her with an expression that held neither welcome nor hostility, only a vast, terrible patience. "You are far from your village, child." His voice was low and cultured, with an accent that spoke of centuries past. It resonated in the vast chamber, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Elena's throat tightened. She forced herself to step forward, crossing the threshold into the castle. The moment she did, the doors swung shut behind her with a soft, final thud. "My lord," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again, louder. "My lord, I have come to beg for your mercy." One elegant eyebrow arched slightly. Mercy. He pronounced the word as if tasting it, finding it strange on his tongue. How curious. The villagers usually come seeking nothing but my death. "I seek nothing but help, my lord. My family, my brother, we are starving. The winter has been cruel and we have nothing left. I know the stories they tell of you, but I also know that you were once—" She faltered, suddenly uncertain. A man, he finished for her, and now there was something in his voice that might have been amusement, or might have been pain. "Yes, once I was a man, but that was a very long time ago." He began to descend the stairs, each step measured and graceful. As he drew closer, Elena could see the details the shadows had hidden, the sharpness of his features, the pallor of his skin, the way his eyes seemed to hold depths of sorrow and hunger that no human gaze should contain. He stopped 3 steps above her, still looking down, still examining her as one might examine an interesting specimen. "You are afraid," he observed. It was not a question. "Yes, my lord, and yet you came." He tilted his head slightly, and candlelight caught the planes of his face, making him appear both beautiful and terrible. "Why?" "Because fear is easier to bear than watching my brother die." The words came out stronger than she expected, fueled by a desperate honesty. "They say you are a monster. They say you are evil. But I have seen evil, my lord. I have seen men who claim to be good turn away from the suffering of children because it is inconvenient to help them. I have seen the cruelty of indifference, and I hoped, that even a monster might have more compassion than that." For a long moment, he said nothing. His dark eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her feel transparent, as if he could see through flesh and bone to the very core of her being. Then slowly something changed in his expression, a softening so subtle she might have imagined it. "What is your name, child?" "Elena, my lord. Elena Novak. Elena." He repeated it softly, as if committing it to memory. Then he turned and gestured toward a doorway to the left of the hall. "Come. If you have traveled so far, you will need food and warmth before we discuss this further." She followed him through corridors lined with more portraits and tapestries, past rooms that seemed to stretch into infinity. They arrived at a smaller chamber, a study perhaps, or a private sitting room. A fire burned in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. A table had been set with food, bread, cheese, dried fruit, a pitcher of wine. It looked as if it had been prepared specifically for her arrival, though she knew that was impossible. "Eat," he commanded, gesturing to the table. He himself moved to stand by the fire, his back to her, his hands clasped behind him. Elena sat hesitantly and took a piece of bread. It was fresh and soft, nothing like the hard, stale crusts she had grown accustomed to. She forced herself to eat slowly, though her hunger screamed at her to devour everything before her. "You speak of your brother," he said without turning, "but you do not speak of parents. Are you alone?" "My mother and father died this winter, my lord. There is only my brother and myself now." "And you thought I might help you?" His tone was strange, almost wondering. "You who have nothing to offer in return." Elena set down the bread. Her hands trembled slightly. "I can work, my lord. I am strong, and I learn quickly. I can clean, or cook, or tend to whatever needs tending. I ask for nothing for myself, only enough food to keep my brother alive until spring comes." He turned then, his eyes finding hers across the room. "And if I were to demand more than labor?" Her heart hammered in her chest, but she met his gaze steadily. "Then I suppose that would be the price of my brother's life. You would sacrifice yourself so easily. Is it sacrifice if it is the only choice that matters?" He moved toward her then, crossing the room with that same liquid grace. He stopped beside her chair, close enough that she could feel the strange coldness that emanated from him, as if he carried winter itself in his bones. He reached out slowly, giving her time to flinch away if she chose, and touched her face with fingers as cold as marble. "You are either the bravest mortal I have encountered in centuries," he said softly, "or the most foolish." Elena's breath caught. This close, she could see things she had not noticed before. The way his skin seemed almost translucent in the firelight, the absence of any rise and fall of breath in his chest, the complete stillness of his form. He was beautiful in the way a sculpture was beautiful, perfect and cold and utterly inhuman, and yet, when he looked at her, she saw something in those ancient eyes that seemed almost vulnerable. "I have never kissed a vampire," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. It was such an absurd thing to say, such a strange and inappropriate confession in this moment, that she immediately flushed with embarrassment. His hand stilled against her cheek. For a heartbeat he simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, terribly, his lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "No," he said, his voice barely above a murmur. "I suppose you have not." He withdrew his hand and stepped back, turning away from her once more. When he spoke again, his voice had returned to that careful, controlled tone. "You will stay here tonight. Tomorrow we will discuss the terms of your employment. There are rooms prepared in the East Wing. My servant, Gregor, will show you the way. You are not to wander the castle at night, Elena Novak. There are things in the darkness here that even I cannot always control. Do you understand?" "Yes, my lord." "Good." He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. The firelight caught in his eyes, making them gleam like polished obsidian. "And Elena, that strange confession of yours. Keep such thoughts to yourself. They are dangerous, more dangerous than you can possibly imagine." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the warm room, with the remains of her meal and the echo of his words. Elena sat in silence for a long time, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant howling of wolves. She had come seeking mercy and had found something far more complicated. The Count was indeed a monster, of that she had no doubt. But he was also something else, something wounded and lonely and impossibly old. She thought of her brother, waiting in the village. She thought of the cold and the hunger and the long dark winter. And she thought of the Count's eyes and the way his hand had trembled, just barely, when he touched her face. Whatever happened next, whatever price she would have to pay, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: her life would never be the same. She had crossed the threshold of shadows, and there was no going back. The fire burned lower, and somewhere in the depths of the castle she heard footsteps approaching, slow, measured, accompanied by the tap of a walking stick on stone. The servant had come to lead her to her room, to the beginning of whatever strange new existence awaited her within these ancient walls. Elena rose from her chair, straightened her worn shawl, and prepared to follow him into the darkness. Elena woke to darkness so complete she could not tell if her eyes were open or closed. For a moment panic seized her. She thrashed against what she thought were confining walls, only to realize she was tangled in sheets finer than any she had ever touched. Silk whispered against her skin as she sat up, breathing hard, her heart hammering in her chest. Slowly, her eyes adjusted. A sliver of moonlight penetrated through heavy curtains, revealing the outline of an enormous room. She could make out the shape of furniture, a wardrobe, a vanity, chairs upholstered in what looked like velvet. The bed beneath her was massive, its posts carved with those same roses and thorns that seemed to decorate every surface in this place. She remembered now. The old servant Gregor had led her here last night, his face a map of wrinkles and his eyes carefully blank. He had said nothing except to point out the wash basin and inform her that someone would come for her in the morning. Then he had left her alone with her thoughts, and a silence so profound it seemed to have weight. Elena rose from the bed, wrapping one of the silk sheets around her shoulders like a shawl. Her own clothes, the rough wool dress and threadbare shawl, had been laid across a chair, cleaned and mended with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. Someone had tended to them while she slept. The thought made her uneasy. She had not heard anyone enter. She moved to the window and drew back the curtains. The view stole her breath. The room faced east, overlooking a vast expanse of mountains and forests that stretched to the horizon. The village of Bran was barely visible in the distance, a handful of lights scattered like fallen stars. The sky was beginning to lighten, the black of night fading to deep blue, then to the pale grey that preceded dawn. As she watched, a strange thing happened. The castle seemed to hold its breath. The silence deepened, became expectant, and then, Just as the first rays of sunlight began to touch the distant peaks, she heard it, a sound like a great door closing somewhere deep below, followed by the unmistakable click of locks falling into place. The castle was sealing itself against the day. A knock at her door made her jump. "Miss Novak?" It was a woman's voice, soft and uncertain. "May I enter?" "Yes, please." The door opened to reveal a young woman, perhaps a few years older than Elena herself. She was pale, but not unnaturally so, with auburn hair bound in a simple braid and eyes the color of honey. She wore a black dress and white apron, the uniform of a servant, and carried a tray laden with breakfast. "Good morning, miss. I'm Maria. I'm to help you dress and bring you to the morning room when you're ready." She set the tray on a small table near the window and offered a tentative smile. "The master said you're to have whatever you need." Elena studied her carefully. "You work here in the castle?" "Yes, miss. For 3 years now." Maria moved to the wardrobe and began laying out clothing, a simple but well-made dress in deep green, with a clean white chemise and stockings. "There are 5 of us in total: Cook, Gregor the butler, Thomas the groundskeeper, Anna who tends the upper floors, and myself." "And you're not afraid?" Maria's hands stilled for a moment on the fabric. "The master has never harmed us, miss. He is exacting and can be cold, but he is not cruel. Not to those who serve him faithfully." She paused, then added more quietly, "There are far worse masters in this world than Count Dracula. I know, I've served some of them." There was a story there, Elena sensed, dark and painful. She did not press. Instead, she ate the breakfast, fresh bread, soft cheese, honey and fruit that should not exist in February, while Maria helped her wash and dress. The green dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her, and when she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Clean, fed and dressed in fine clothing, she looked almost like a lady rather than a starving peasant. "The master wishes to speak with you in his study," Maria said, as she finished pinning Elena's dark hair into a simple but elegant arrangement. "I'll take you there now, if you're ready." Elena nodded, her stomach tightening with nervousness. The food sat heavy within her, reminding her that she had eaten more in the last 12 hours than in the previous week. Whatever the Count wanted from her, she would pay it. She had to. They walked through corridors that seemed different in daylight, or what passed for daylight within these perpetually shadowed halls. The candles still burned, but their light seemed dimmer, less necessary. Maria led her down staircases and through galleries hung with portraits of stern-faced nobles, their eyes seeming to follow as they passed. Finally, they arrived at a heavy wooden door. Maria knocked twice, and the Count's voice called from within, "Enter!" The study was exactly as Elena remembered it from the night before, though the fire had burned down to embers and the table had been cleared. Count Dracula stood by the window, his back to the room, his hands clasped behind him. He wore different clothing now, still black but simpler without the elaborate coat. He looked almost human in the grey morning light, almost approachable, almost. "Thank you, Maria. You may go." He did not turn as he spoke. The door closed softly behind the servant, and Elena found herself alone with him once more. She waited, unsure if she should speak first. "Did you sleep well?" he asked finally, still facing the window. "Yes, my lord. Better than I have in months." "Good." He turned then, and she saw that he looked weary, if such a creature could be weary. There were shadows beneath his eyes, and his skin seemed even paler than before, almost translucent. "We must discuss the terms of our arrangement." "Yes, my lord." He moved to his desk and gestured for her to sit in the chair across from it. She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. He did not sit, but instead stood beside the desk, looming over her. "I have thought about your request," he said. "You wish for food enough to keep your brother alive until spring. That is easily provided. However, I do not give charity, Elena Novak. If I help you, you will serve me in return." "I understand, my lord. I will work however you require." "Will you?" His eyes fixed on her with that unnerving intensity. "You do not know what I will require. You do not know what living in this castle means." "Then tell me." He was silent for a long moment, seeming to consider his words. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "You will serve as my companion, not in the way you fear," he added quickly, seeing the color rise in her cheeks. "I have no need of such things, but I have lived alone in this castle for longer than you can imagine, speaking only to servants who fear me too much for genuine conversation. You, however, came here despite your fear. You spoke to me with honesty, even defiance. That is rare." Elena tried to understand. You want someone to talk to. I want someone who will see me as something more than a monster to be feared or destroyed. Someone who will sit with me in the evenings and speak of ordinary things, of books, of music, of the world beyond these walls. Someone who will remind me what it is to be—" He trailed off, then shook his head. "It does not matter. In exchange for this companionship, I will provide food for your brother. Gregor will deliver supplies to your cottage each week. Bread, meat, preserved fruits, whatever is needed. Your brother will not go hungry." It seemed too simple, too easy. Elena frowned. "That's all? You just want conversation?" "That is all I ask." He turned away again, moving back to the window. "You will have your days free to do as you wish. But your evenings, from sunset until midnight, those belong to me. You will dine with me, sit with me, speak with me. Nothing more, nothing less. And if I refuse, then you are free to leave, and we will forget this meeting ever occurred." Elena thought of her brother, of his hollow eyes and protruding ribs. She thought of the cold cottage and the empty cupboards. She thought of watching him die slowly, painfully, while she stood helpless. "I accept, my lord." He glanced back at her, and something flickered across his face. Relief, perhaps, or something deeper and more complicated. "You may call me Dracula." The title, my lord, grows tiresome when used constantly. "As you wish. Dracula." His name felt strange on her tongue, dangerous and intimate all at once. "There are rules you must follow," he continued. "You are not to enter the West Wing under any circumstances. You are not to wander the castle after midnight. You are not to ask me about my past unless I choose to share it. And you are never, ever to invite anyone else into this castle. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Good." He moved to the door and opened it. "Gregor will show you the library and the music room. You may use them freely during the day. Tonight, we will dine together at sunset. Until then, you are dismissed." Elena rose and moved toward the door, but as she passed him, she paused. "May I ask one question?" "You may ask. I may not answer. Why did you agree to help me? Truly?" He looked down at her, his dark eyes unreadable. For a moment she thought he would not respond. Then he said softly, "Because you reminded me of something I thought I had forgotten. Because when you looked at me last night, you saw a monster and chose to speak to me anyway. And because—" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Go, Elena. Explore your new home. We will speak more tonight." She left him standing in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the grey light, and followed Gregor through the castle's winding corridors. The library was vast, a cathedral of books that stretched 3 stories high, with spiral staircases connecting the levels and windows of stained glass, casting coloured light across the floor. Elena had never seen so many books in her life. She ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles in languages she recognized and many she did not. "The master is very particular about his books," Gregor said from behind her. His voice was dry and rasping, like old paper. "But he has given permission for you to read whatever you wish. He asks only that you treat them with care." "I will," Elena promised, already pulling a volume from the shelf. It was a collection of poetry, the pages yellowed with age, but the words still clear. She settled into a chair near one of the windows and began to read. She lost track of time in that library. Hours passed as she moved from poetry to history to philosophy, absorbing knowledge like a plant starved for sunlight. No one disturbed her. Occasionally she would hear footsteps in the corridor outside, or the distant sound of doors opening and closing, but mostly there was only silence and the whisper of turning pages. When Maria came to fetch her for the evening meal, Elena was surprised to see that the light outside had grown dim, the sun setting behind the mountains. "The master is waiting, miss," Maria said gently. Elena set aside her book, a translation of ancient Greek myths, and followed the servant to a different room than the night before. This was a proper dining room, long and elegant, with a table that could have seated 20, but was set for only 2. Candles burned in silver candelabras, and a fire roared in the hearth. And at the head of the table sat Dracula, dressed once more in his formal black coat, his pale hands folded before him. He rose when she entered, a gesture of courtesy that seemed strange coming from him. "Elena, please sit." She took the seat at his right hand, close enough to speak comfortably, but far enough to maintain propriety. Almost immediately servants appeared with food: roasted meat, fresh vegetables, bread still warm from the oven, wine that glowed ruby red in the candlelight. Elena noticed that while her plate was filled generously, his remained empty. He poured wine for both of them, but did not drink from his own glass. "You don't eat," she observed. "No." I have no need of such sustenance anymore. His tone was matter-of-fact, neither bitter nor boastful. But I remember the taste of it, the pleasure of a good meal. I enjoy watching others partake, in a way. It reminds me of being human. Does it pain you? Being reminded? He considered her question, swirling the wine in his glass, but never bringing it to his lips. Sometimes, but pain, I have found, is better than numbness. When you have lived as long as I have, you cling to any feeling at all, even if it hurts. Elena cut into her meat, savoring the rich flavor. How long have you lived? Longer than your village has existed, longer than the oldest trees in these mountains. I was born in 1431, in the month of November. I was 35 years old when I changed. That was 564 years ago. The numbers were incomprehensible. Elena tried to imagine that much time, that many years of existence, and failed. That's an eternity, he finished. Yes, it is. They ate in silence for a while. Or rather, Elena ate while Dracula watched her with those dark, fathomless eyes. It should have been uncomfortable, being observed so intently, but somehow it wasn't. There was nothing predatory in his gaze, only a kind of melancholy fascination. Tell me about yourself, he said finally. Your life before you came here. I know so little of how peasants live now. So Elena told him. She spoke of her childhood, of learning to work the land beside her father, of her mother's gentle hands and soft songs. She spoke of the village, of the neighbors who had been kind and those who had not, of feast days and weddings and births. She spoke of the slow creeping fear as the harvests failed and the winter grew harsher, of watching her parents waste away despite her best efforts to save them. He listened without interruption, his attention never wavering. When she finished, her throat was tight with unshed tears. You have known more loss in your 23 years than many experience in a full lifetime, he said quietly. And yet you came here seeking not revenge or escape, but hope. You are stronger than you know, Elena Novak. I don't feel strong. I feel terrified. The two are not mutually exclusive. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. Do you know what I see when I look at you? She shook her head. I see someone who still possesses something I lost centuries ago. Compassion, the willingness to sacrifice oneself for another, the belief that tomorrow might be better than today. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I see humanity, pure and uncorrupted. It is painful and beautiful, and I find I cannot look away. Elena's breath caught. There was something in his eyes now, something raw and desperate and utterly vulnerable. In that moment, he did not look like a monster at all. He looked like a man who had been drowning for centuries and had just glimpsed the surface of the water. That thing you said last night, he continued, his voice carefully controlled once more, about never having kissed a vampire. Why did you say it? She felt heat rise in her cheeks. I don't know, it was foolish, the words just came out. But you meant them. There was truth in your voice. I suppose I was trying to say that I didn't know what to expect. That everything about this, about you, was strange and frightening and completely outside my experience. I've never even kissed a boy from my village, let alone... She trailed off, unable to finish. Let alone a creature like me. I didn't mean it that way, didn't you? He stood abruptly, moving to the window. The moon had risen, full and bright, casting silver light across his features. You should mean it that way, Elena. You should remember what I am. A kiss from me would not be the innocent gesture it might be from one of your village boys. It would be dangerous, possibly fatal. Is that why you refuse to drink the wine? Because you fear losing control? He turned sharply, surprise flickering across his face. You are more perceptive than I gave you credit for. You said you feed on blood, but you don't feed on your servants, or else Maria wouldn't speak of you so calmly. So you must get it elsewhere, or deny yourself. She met his gaze steadily. Which is it? For a long moment he said nothing. Then he laughed, a low, bitter sound. You should have been an inquisitor, Elena Novak. Very well. Yes, I deny myself. I feed only when absolutely necessary, and only on animals when I can manage it. The hunger is always there, always clawing at the edges of my control. But I will not become the monster they believe me to be. I will not kill the innocent to satisfy my curse. That must be agony. It is. But it is the penance I pay for my sins. He moved back to the table, standing close enough that she could feel that strange coldness emanating from him. Do you understand now why you should fear me? Why that innocent confession of yours was so dangerous? Elena rose to face him, tilting her head back to meet his eyes. I understand that you are fighting against your own nature every moment of every day. I understand that you choose to suffer rather than harm others. And I understand that whatever you once were, whatever terrible things you may have done, you are trying to be better now. You are naive, perhaps. Or perhaps I simply see you more clearly than you see yourself. He reached out slowly, giving her time to step away, and touched her face just as he had the night before. His fingers were cold, but his touch was gentle, almost reverent. I have not been seen in a very long time, he whispered. They stood like that for a heartbeat, for an eternity, his hand against her cheek and her pulse racing beneath her skin. She knew she should be frightened. She knew she should pull away, but instead she found herself leaning into his touch, drawn by something she could not name and did not fully understand. Then the clock chimed midnight, and the spell broke. He withdrew his hand and stepped back, his expression carefully blank once more. It is late. You should retire. Of course. She moved toward the door, then paused. Thank you for the food and for the conversation. It is I who should thank you, he said softly. Sleep well, Elena Novak. Tomorrow night, perhaps you will tell me of the books you read today. She smiled and left him standing in the candlelight, a dark figure in a room full of shadows. As she walked back to her room, escorted by the ever-silent Gregor, Elena found herself thinking not of the danger she was in, or the strangeness of her situation, but of the way Dracula's eyes had looked when he touched her face. The loneliness she had seen there, vast and terrible and achingly human. She had come seeking mercy for her brother, and had found something far more complicated. She had found a monster who was trying desperately to remember how to be a man. And God help her, but she wanted to help him remember. 3 weeks passed like a dream within the castle walls. Elena fell into a rhythm she had never imagined possible. Days spent in the library or wandering the gardens when the weather permitted. Evenings spent in conversation with Dracula over meals she ate while he watched with those dark, thoughtful eyes. They spoke of everything and nothing, philosophy and poetry, history and myth, the nature of good and evil, the weight of memory and the burden of immortality. She learned that he had been a warrior once, a voivode who had defended his land against invaders. She learned that he loved music, but could no longer play instruments himself, for his supernatural strength made it impossible to touch them without breaking them. She learned that he remembered every person he had ever killed, could recite their names like a litany of sins, and slowly, carefully, she began to see past the monster to the man beneath, brilliant and tormented, lonely beyond measure, fighting a battle against his own nature that no one else could see. True to his word, Gregor delivered supplies to her cottage each week. Maria reported that Elena's brother was eating well, growing stronger, no longer in danger of starvation. Elena should have been content. She should have been grateful and nothing more. But she found herself thinking of Dracula at odd moments during the day, the way candlelight caught in his dark hair, the rare moments when something she said made him almost smile, the careful distance he maintained between them, even as his eyes betrayed a hunger that had nothing to do with blood. It was dangerous, this growing fascination. She knew that, but knowledge did nothing to stop the quickening of her pulse when she heard his footsteps in the corridor, or the warmth that bloomed in her chest when he looked at her as if she were something precious and fragile and utterly incomprehensible. On the first day of March, everything changed. Elena was in the music room listening to a gramophone Dracula had shown her how to operate. The sound quality was scratchy and distant, but the melody was beautiful, a waltz from a century past. She found herself swaying slightly to the rhythm, imagining what it might be like to dance in a ballroom full of light and laughter. You move with grace. His voice came from the doorway, startling her. She turned to find him watching her, dressed as always in black, his expression unreadable. I was pretending I've never actually danced. Peasants don't have balls. Would you like to learn? She blinked in surprise. Now? Why not? He moved into the room, and before she could protest, he was standing before her, offering his hand. I have not danced in 200 years, but I suspect it is like riding a horse. The body remembers. Elena hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, cold and strong, and his other hand came to rest lightly at her waist. Even through the fabric of her dress, she could feel that unnatural chill. Follow my lead, he said softly, and began to move. It was awkward at first. Elena stumbled over her own feet, unused to the patterns and the rhythm, but Dracula was patient, guiding her gently, adjusting her posture with careful touches that never lingered longer than necessary. Gradually she began to understand the flow of it, the give and take, the way their bodies moved in response to each other. The waltz played on, and they turned slowly across the floor, his eyes never leaving her face. "You're a natural," he murmured. "You're a good teacher. I had excellent instruction. My mother insisted that all her children learn to dance properly, even if we were destined for war rather than courts." A shadow passed over his face. "She would have liked you, I think. Tell me about her." And so he did, his voice low and steady as they moved together. He spoke of a woman strong and wise, who had ruled beside his father with an iron will tempered by compassion. He spoke of childhood memories, rare and precious things for someone who had lived so long. He spoke of a time before the curse, before the darkness, when he had been simply a man with a future and a family and hope. Elena listened, her heart aching for the loss she heard beneath his words. Without thinking, she leaned closer, resting her head against his chest where a heartbeat should have been and was not. He went very still. "Elena," he said, his voice strained. "You should not—" "I know," but she did not pull away. "Tell me what happened. How you became this." For a long moment she thought he would refuse. His body was rigid, his hand at her waist trembling slightly. Then, slowly, he began to speak. "There was a war. My family was slaughtered, my lands burned, my people enslaved. I was captured and imprisoned, tortured for information I would not give. I should have died in that prison. I wanted to die." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "But something found me in the darkness. Something old and hungry and evil. It offered me a choice: death, or the power to take revenge on those who had destroyed everything I loved. You chose revenge. I chose damnation." His hand tightened on hers. "I became something no longer human, no longer alive. I hunted down my enemies and destroyed them utterly. And when they were gone, when my vengeance was complete, I discovered that the curse could not be broken. I was trapped in this form, this endless hunger, forever." Elena lifted her head to look at him. Tears blurred her vision, but she could still see the pain etched into every line of his face. "That was 500 years ago. You could have given in to the monster long ago. But you didn't. You chose to fight it instead. Fighting changes nothing. I am still cursed, still damned, but not defeated." She reached up with her free hand and touched his face, mirroring the gesture he had made to her so many times. His skin was cold as marble, but beneath it she could feel the slight tension of muscle, the reality of him. "You are not defeated, Dracula. As long as you still fight, there is hope." He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek, and closed his eyes. "You should not touch me like this. You should not look at me the way you do. It makes me want things I have no right to want." "What do you want?" "To be human again. To feel warmth instead of cold. To taste food and wine and know joy without pain." He opened his eyes, and they were filled with a desperate yearning that stole her breath. "To kiss you, without fear of killing you. To hold you without worrying that my strength will crush you. To be worthy of the way you see me." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. The gramophone had fallen silent, leaving only the sound of their breathing, or rather hers, for he had no need of breath. They stood frozen in a tableau of longing and impossibility, his hand still holding hers against his face, her body pressed close to his cold, still form. "I'm not afraid," she whispered. "You should be, but I'm not." He released her abruptly and stepped back, his expression hardening. "This cannot continue. I was a fool to allow it to begin. You are my companion, nothing more. I will not. I cannot." The sound of shattering glass interrupted him. They both turned toward the window just as a figure crashed through it in an explosion of broken shards and cold night air. The man who landed in a crouch on the music room floor was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing, and carrying weapons that gleamed silver in the candlelight. His face was weathered and grim, marked by old scars, and his eyes burned with fanatic hatred as they fixed on Dracula. "Monster," he spat, rising to his feet. "Your reign of terror ends tonight." Elena recognized him. Father Andre, the priest from the neighboring village of Borgo. She had seen him once, years ago, when he had come to Bran to perform an exorcism on a house supposedly haunted by evil spirits. Even then, he had seemed less holy man than warrior, his sermons full of fire and vengeance. Dracula moved instantly, placing himself between Elena and the hunter. "Father Andre, I wondered when you would finally gather the courage to face me directly rather than sending your ill-fated disciples. Those men were martyrs, purifying the world of your filth." The priest raised a crossbow, its bolt gleaming silver. "And now I will finish what they started." "Wait!" Elena stepped forward before Dracula could stop her. You don't understand. He's not what you think. Silence, girl. Father Andrei's eyes flicked to her, and she saw recognition dawn in them, followed by disgust. Elena Novak, I heard you had vanished. I should have known you would be here, corrupted by his evil. He has seduced you, poisoned your mind. But I will save your soul, child, after I destroy him. He hasn't done anything to me. He's helped me, kept my brother alive. With cursed food bought by unholy powers. The priest's finger tightened on the trigger. Step aside, girl, or be destroyed along with him. Dracula's hand shot out, gripping Elena's arm and pulling her behind him with supernatural speed. His voice, when he spoke, was cold and commanding. Leave, Andrei. You are outmatched and you know it. I have no desire to kill a man of God, even one as misguided as you. You have no power over me, demon. I am protected by faith and righteousness. The priest fired. The bolt flew straight and true, aimed directly at Dracula's heart. But the Count moved faster than human eyes could follow, twisting aside. The silver bolt buried itself in the wall behind him, missing by inches. Father Andrei cursed and reached for another bolt, but Dracula was already upon him. He grabbed the crossbow and crushed it with one hand, the wood splintering like kindling. Then he seized the priest by the throat and lifted him off the floor. I said leave. His voice was no longer human. It was the growl of something ancient and terrible, something that had forgotten mercy. While I still allow it. The priest clawed at Dracula's hand, his face turning purple, but even as he choked, he managed to rasp out words. Kill me, and prove what you are. Elena saw the struggle playing out on Dracula's face, the monster warring with the man, the hunger warring with control. His fangs had descended, gleaming white in the candlelight, and his eyes had gone completely black. She recognized the edge he was walking, the precipice beyond which there would be no return. Dracula, she said softly, moving to stand beside him. Don't. This is what he wants. He wants you to prove him right. He tried to kill me. To kill you. I know. But you're stronger than this. Stronger than the monster he thinks you are. She placed her hand on his arm, feeling the tension thrumming through him like a wire pulled too tight. Let him go. Please. For a terrible moment, she thought he would refuse. His grip tightened on the priest's throat, and Father Andrei's struggles grew weaker. Then, with a sound like a wounded animal, Dracula released him. The priest collapsed to the floor, gasping and coughing. Dracula turned away, his shoulders shaking, his hands clenched into fists so tight that his knuckles had gone white. Get out, he said hoarsely. Get out before I change my mind. Father Andrei struggled to his feet, one hand at his bruised throat. His eyes blazed with undiminished hatred as he looked at Elena. You are lost, girl. Damned by your association with him, but I will pray for your soul. He moved toward the shattered window, then paused. This is not over, monster. I will return with others. We will cleanse this land of your corruption. Then you will die. Dracula did not turn around. All of you, because next time I will not show mercy. The priest climbed through the window and disappeared into the night. Silence fell over the music room, broken only by the sound of wind whistling through the shattered glass. Elena moved to Dracula's side. He was trembling now, his whole body racked with shudders as he fought to regain control. His fangs were still descended, his eyes still black, and she could see the effort it took him not to give in to the hunger clawing at him. Look at me, she said gently. No, you should not see me like this. I said look at me. Slowly, reluctantly, he turned. His face was a mask of anguish, his features sharp and inhuman. He looked like the monster everyone believed him to be, and yet Elena felt no fear. Instead, she felt only compassion for the agony she saw written in his eyes. I almost killed him, he whispered. I wanted to kill him. The hunger was so strong, Elena. I could hear his heart beating, smell his blood. It would have been so easy to just give in. But you didn't. You chose not to. Because of you. Only because of you. He reached for her, then pulled his hand back as if afraid to touch her. Don't you understand? This is why you should fear me. This is why what we feel, what I feel, is impossible. I am a monster barely held in check, and you are the only thing standing between me and complete damnation. What happens when I fail? What happens when my control finally breaks? You won't fail. You cannot know that. Yes, I can. She took his hand, ignoring the cold, the trembling, the danger. Because I know you. I see you, Dracula. The real you beneath the curse and the darkness. And the real you would rather die than hurt someone innocent. He made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. You have too much faith in me. Someone needs to. They stood together in the ruined music room as snow began to fall through the shattered window, dusting their shoulders with white. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled, a lonely, mournful sound that seemed to echo Dracula's pain. "Father André will return," Elena said quietly, "and he'll bring others with him. Hunters, maybe even an army. I know. We need to prepare. To protect the castle, to protect—" She hesitated. "To protect you." He looked down at her, and slowly the blackness faded from his eyes, replaced once more by that deep, fathomless brown. His fangs retracted, and his features softened back to almost human. "You would protect me? A monster. I would protect the man I've come to." She stopped, suddenly aware of what she had been about to say. The words hung unspoken between them, heavy with meaning and impossibility. Dracula touched her face one last time, his hand lingering against her cheek. "Finish that sentence, Elena, and we will both be lost." "Maybe I want to be lost." "You don't mean that, don't I?" She leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "I came here expecting a monster and found a man. I came seeking charity and found something more, something I never knew I needed. You say you want to be worthy of how I see you, but you already are. You already are, Dracula." His control, already strained to breaking, finally shattered. He pulled her to him, his arms wrapping around her, crushing her against his chest with a desperation that spoke of centuries of loneliness. He buried his face in her hair, and she felt him shaking, not with hunger now, but with something deeper and more human. "I do not deserve you," he whispered against her hair, "but God help me. I cannot let you go." Elena wrapped her arms around him in return, holding this monster-man creature, who had shown her more kindness than most humans ever had. She held him as the snow fell and the wolves sang their savage songs, and she knew with absolute certainty that her life had changed irrevocably. She had crossed more than just a threshold when she entered this castle. She had crossed the boundary between fear and compassion, between safety and danger, between the ordinary world and something far more profound, and there was no going back. Father André would return with his hunters, bringing fire and faith and holy wrath. The village would condemn her as corrupted, damned by association. Her brother would be safe and fed, but she would never be able to return to him. But none of that mattered as much as the feel of Dracula's arms around her, the sound of his voice whispering her name like a prayer, the knowledge that she had become essential to someone who had believed himself beyond redemption. She had never kissed a vampire, she had told him that first night, such an innocent, foolish thing to say. But now, standing in his embrace amid the ruins of a music room and the shattered remnants of his carefully maintained control, she found herself wondering what it would be like, what it would mean, what they would both become if they crossed that final, forbidden boundary. The answer terrified her. The answer thrilled her. The answer was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. Because Father André had not come alone to the castle. As Dracula and Elena stood wrapped in each other's arms, neither of them heard the sounds from outside, the creak of wagon wheels on frozen ground, the murmur of voices, the strike of flint on steel. Neither of them saw the torches being lit at the base of the mountain, or the mob of villagers gathering with pitchforks and crosses and ancient fear in their hearts. Neither of them knew that the battle for Dracula's soul and Elena's life had only just begun. The snow continued to fall, covering the world in white, and in the music room of Castle Dracula, two impossible figures held each other as if they were the only real things in a world of shadows and dreams. The bells began tolling at dawn. Elena woke to the sound, distant but insistent, echoing across the valley from the village churches. It was not the joyful peal of celebration or the solemn rhythm of prayer, but something else entirely, a warning, a call to arms, a declaration of war. She rushed to her window and pulled back the curtains. What she saw made her blood run cold. The mountain path leading to the castle was filled with people, dozens of them, perhaps 100 or more. They carried torches despite the morning light, their flames pale against the grey sky. She could see crosses held high, weapons glinting, and at the front of the mob, unmistakable even at this distance, stood Father André, with his arms raised as if in benediction or condemnation. They had come. Elena dressed hastily and ran through the corridors, her heart pounding. She found Maria in the kitchen, pale and trembling as she stared out the window at the approaching mob. "Miss Elena," the servant whispered, "they mean to destroy him, to destroy all of us. Where is he? Where is Dracula?" "In the great hall with Gregor and the others. They're preparing the defenses." Maria grabbed Elena's arm, her fingers digging in with desperate strength. "You should leave, miss, while you still can. They won't harm you if you go now, if you renounce him." "I'm not leaving." Elena pulled free and ran toward the great hall. She found him standing before the massive fireplace, dressed in armor that looked as if it had come from another age. Black plate decorated with silver, a sword at his hip, his dark hair pulled back from his face. He looked every inch the warrior he had once been, terrible and magnificent. Gregor stood nearby with Thomas and the cook, an old woman named Catalin. All of them looked frightened but determined. Elena. Dracula turned at her entrance, and she saw the conflict in his eyes. Relief that she was safe, fear for what was coming. "You should be in the East Wing. It's the most secure part of the castle. I'm not hiding while you face this alone. This is not your fight." "Yes, it is." She moved to stand before him, looking up into that pale, beloved face. "They're coming because of me as much as you. Father Andrei saw us together. He thinks you've corrupted me, seduced me. This is as much about punishing me as destroying you. Then all the more reason for you to flee. I can hold them off, give you time to escape. And go where? Back to the village that would burn me as a witch? To my brother bringing death and fire to his door?" She shook her head. "No, my place is here, with you." He reached for her, then stopped himself, his hand falling back to his side. The gesture was full of longing and restraint, and it broke her heart. "I cannot protect you and fight them both. Then don't protect me. Teach me to protect myself. Elena, please." She grabbed his hand, cold and strong in hers. "I'm not helpless. I'm not some fragile maiden who needs to be locked away. Give me something to fight with. Let me stand beside you." For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. Then slowly he nodded. "Gregor, bring one of the shorter swords from the armory, and find her something better to wear than that dress." The old servant bowed and hurried away. Dracula turned back to Elena, and now his expression was grave. "If I teach you to fight, you may have to kill. Are you prepared for that?" She thought of her parents' graves, of her brother's hollow eyes, of the long winter nights when she had prayed for a miracle that never came. She thought of the warmth she had found in this dark place, the kindness hidden beneath monstrous form, the man struggling desperately to remain human despite the curse that tried to strip his humanity away. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'm prepared." By the time the mob reached the castle gates, Elena stood beside Dracula on the battlements, dressed in leather armor that had been hastily modified to fit her smaller frame. A sword hung at her hip, shorter and lighter than a man's weapon, but still deadly. Her hands shook slightly, but her jaw was set with determination. Below, the villagers spread out across the courtyard. She recognized faces among them, people she had known all her life, who had shared bread at festivals and danced at weddings. Now they looked up at the castle with fear and hatred burning in their eyes. Father Andrei stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly in the cold morning air. "Count Dracula, monster of the mountains! In the name of God and all that is holy, I command you to release the girl Elena Novak and surrender yourself for judgment." Dracula's hand rested on the parapet, his fingers curled into a fist. "Elena Novak is here of her own free will. She is under my protection. Leave now, priest, and I will spare your lives." "We do not negotiate with demons." Father Andrei raised his cross high. "You have terrorized these lands for centuries. You have drunk the blood of the innocent and spread corruption wherever you walk. Today, your evil ends." A roar went up from the mob. They surged forward, pressing against the gates. Elena heard the crack of wood, saw the gates shudder under the impact. "They'll break through," she said quietly. "I know." Dracula turned to her, and his eyes held such sadness that she wanted to weep. "Elena, it is not too late. You can still go to them. Tell them I forced you here. They will believe you. They want to believe you. I'm not leaving you. You stubborn, beautiful, impossible woman." He touched her face, a brief caress that might be the last. "Very well. Then we fight together." The gates gave way with a thunderous crash. The mob poured through like a flood, their torches held high, their weapons glinting. Father Andrei led them, his face a mask of righteous fury. Dracula drew his sword, the blade singing as it left the scabbard. "Stay close to me, do not let them separate us, and remember, they are frightened people, not monsters. Wound if you must, but do not kill unless there is no other choice." Then there was no more time for words. The battle began. Dracula moved like liquid death, his sword a silver arc in the morning light. He did not kill. True to his word, he disarmed and wounded, sending attackers stumbling back with injuries that would heal, but not kill. But there were so many of them, wave after wave pressing forward, and even his supernatural speed could not be everywhere at once. Elena found herself facing a man with a pitchfork, old Ivan from the mill, who had always been kind to her mother. Now he jabbed at her with his makeshift weapon, his eyes wild with fear and fervor. "Ivan, stop!" she cried. "It's me, Elena." "You're one of them now," he shouted back. "Corrupted! Damned!" The pitchfork drove at her chest. Training took over. Dracula had spent the last hour teaching her basic parries and strikes, and her body remembered. She knocked the pitchfork aside with her sword and kicked Ivan's legs out from under him. He fell hard, and she pressed her blade to his throat. "Stay down," she commanded, her voice shaking. "Please, Ivan, just stay down." He stared up at her in shock, then nodded slowly. She pulled back her sword and moved on, her heart hammering. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but could only have been minutes. The servants fought too, Gregor with a staff that he wielded with surprising skill, Thomas with an axe, even old Catalin throwing pots of boiling water from the walls. They were outnumbered 10-1. But the castle's defenses and Dracula's supernatural prowess kept the mob at bay, until Father Andre brought out his secret weapon. The priest raised his hands, and his voice rang out in Latin, words of holy power, ancient prayers meant to bind and weaken creatures of darkness. Elena didn't understand the language, but she felt the effect immediately. Dracula stumbled, his sword dipping, his face contorting with pain. "No!" Elena rushed to his side as he fell to one knee. "What's happening?" "Holy words," he gasped. "They hurt, like fire in my veins. Elena, you must—" Father Andre continued his chanting, advancing up the steps toward them. Behind him, emboldened by Dracula's weakness, the mob pressed forward. Elena stood over Dracula, her sword raised, placing herself between him and the advancing priest. "Stop it! You're killing him!" "That is the intention, child." Father Andre's eyes blazed with fanatic light. "Step aside, let God's justice be done." "God's justice?" Elena's voice cracked with anger and desperation. "You speak of justice while leading a mob to murder someone who has harmed none of you? He could have killed you all a dozen times over, but he chose mercy. He chose restraint. What justice is there in destroying someone for what they might do rather than what they have done? He is a vampire, a creature of Satan. His very existence is an abomination. His existence is a curse he didn't choose." Tears streamed down Elena's face now, hot against her cold cheeks. He was a man once, a good man who was broken and transformed against his will. And every day, every moment, he fights against that curse. He chooses humanity over monstrosity. He chooses mercy over hunger. If that is not holy, if that is not righteous, then what is? Father Andre faltered, his chanting breaking. For just a moment, doubt flickered across his face. It was enough. Dracula surged to his feet with a roar that was more animal than human. The holy words had weakened him, but not destroyed him, and now rage gave him new strength. He swept Elena behind him and advanced on the priest, his eyes blazing red, his fangs fully descended. "You want a monster?" His voice was no longer human, no longer anything that had ever been human. "Then behold your monster, priest." He moved faster than sight, grabbing Father Andre by the throat and lifting him off the ground. The mob screamed and fell back, pressing against each other in their terror. Dracula's grip tightened, and the priest's face began to turn purple. "Dracula, no!" Elena grabbed his arm. "Don't do this. Don't prove him right. He tried to kill me. To kill you. I know. But you're better than this. You're better than him." She moved in front of him, forcing him to look at her, to see her. "Please, for me, let him go." The red slowly faded from Dracula's eyes. His fangs retracted. With visible effort, he loosened his grip and let Father Andre drop to the ground. The priest coughed and gasped, clutching his throat, but instead of gratitude or fear, his face showed only renewed determination. "You see," he croaked to the mob, "even his whore cannot fully control him. He is a beast barely leashed." "Enough." The word was quiet, but it carried such weight that everyone fell silent. Dracula stood at the top of the steps, Elena at his side, and looked down at the mob below. When he spoke, his voice was tired and sad and utterly human. "You are right, Father. I am a monster. I have been a monster for 500 years, and no amount of restraint or mercy will change what I am." He looked at Elena, and his expression softened. But this woman saw past the monster to something worth saving. She offered me compassion when I deserved none. She gave me hope when I had abandoned it centuries ago, and for her sake, I will not become the thing you believe me to be." He drew his sword and drove it point first into the stone at his feet, leaving it standing upright between him and the mob. "I will make you an offer, people of Bran. Leave now and never return to this castle. In exchange, I swear on my honor, what little of it remains, that I will never again feed on human blood. I will never harm anyone from your villages. I will remain here in this prison I have made for myself and trouble you no more. All I ask is that you leave me in peace, with the woman who has chosen to stay by my side." The mob murmured uncertainly. Elena saw the conflict on their faces, the fear warring with exhaustion, the hatred tempered by the seed of doubt she had planted in their minds. Father Andrei struggled to his feet. "Do not listen to him. His words are lies meant to—" "They are not lies." Everyone turned to see who had spoken. A figure pushed through the crowd. A small boy, thin and pale, with dark hair and eyes that looked too large for his face. Elena's heart stopped. "Piotr?" she whispered. Her brother made his way to the front of the mob, staring up at the castle. "The Count's servants have brought us food every week," he said loudly, his young voice carrying in the cold air. "Good food, enough to keep me alive when I was starving. My sister came here to beg for help and he gave it freely. He asked nothing in return, harmed no one, took nothing from our village." He looked at Father Andrei with defiance that seemed far too old for his 9 years. "You say he is evil, but he saved my life. What have you done, priest, except bring death to our door?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Others spoke up, people who had received food, whose livestock had been spared when wolves attacked, who had found their sick children miraculously recovered. Small kindnesses, anonymous gifts, mercy extended in the darkness when no one was watching. Father Andrei's face contorted with rage. "You are all deceived, corrupted by his dark magic." He pulled a vial from his robes, holy water, Elena realized, and hurled it at Dracula. The Count didn't move, didn't flinch. The water struck him full in the face and nothing happened. No screaming, no burning flesh, no smoke or agony. The holy water simply ran down his face like ordinary water, dripping onto the stone. Father Andrei stared in shock. "But that's impossible." "Is it?" Dracula wiped the water away with one hand. "Or is it possible that God's judgment is not as simple as you believe? That mercy and compassion might count for something, even in a creature like me?" The priest's certainty crumbled. He looked around at the mob, at the faces now regarding him with suspicion rather than trust, and Elena saw the moment he realized he had lost. "This is not over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I will return to the church, consult with higher authorities." "You will leave," Dracula interrupted, "and you will not return. Because if you do, if you threaten Elena or anyone under my protection again, then I will forget mercy. I will forget restraint, and I will show you exactly what a monster can do when he stops fighting his nature." The threat hung in the air, terrible in its quiet sincerity. Father Andrei flinched, then turned and pushed his way back through the crowd. One by one, the villagers began to retreat. Some looked ashamed, others confused, a few still hostile. But they went, filing out through the broken gates, leaving only Piotr standing alone in the courtyard. Elena ran down the steps and threw her arms around her brother, holding him tight. "Piotr, what are you doing here? It's dangerous." "I had to come." His voice was muffled against her shoulder. "I heard them talking, heard what they planned to do. I couldn't let them hurt you, or him." He pulled back and looked up at Dracula, who had descended the steps to stand nearby. "Thank you, my lord, for saving my sister, for saving me." Dracula knelt down, bringing himself to the boy's level. "It is I who should thank you, young one. You showed more courage today than many warriors I have known." "Will Elena be safe here? With you?" "Safer than anywhere else in this world," Dracula promised. "I swear it." Piotr nodded, satisfied. He hugged Elena one more time, then turned and ran after the retreating villagers, leaving brother and sister separated by the choice she had made. Elena watched him go, tears streaming down her face. Dracula stood beside her, close but not touching, giving her space to grieve. "You gave up everything for me," he said quietly. "Your home, your family, your place in the world. I gave up nothing that mattered." She turned to face him, and despite the tears, her voice was steady. "Everything that matters is right here." He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, this mortal woman who had walked into his darkness and brought light with her. who had defended him against her own people, who had chosen him over everything she had ever known. "I do not deserve you," he whispered. "You keep saying that." She reached up and touched his face, no longer cold to her, no longer strange, just his. "When will you believe that perhaps I'm the one who gets to decide what you deserve? Elena, I never kissed a vampire," she said again, echoing those first foolish words. "But I think I would like to now, if you'll let me." His control, already battered by battle and emotion, finally shattered completely. He pulled her to him and kissed her, not gently, not carefully, but with all the desperate longing of 500 years of loneliness. His lips were cool against hers, but not cold, and his hands cradled her face as if she were something infinitely precious and breakable. Elena kissed him back with equal fervor, tasting nothing of death or darkness, but only him, this man-monster creature who had become more dear to her than life itself. She felt his fangs against her lips, sharp but controlled, felt the trembling in his hands as he held himself back from the hunger that must be screaming at him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, or rather she was breathing hard while he simply stood frozen in wonder, the sun had broken through the clouds, casting pale light across the castle courtyard. "I think," Dracula said slowly, his voice rough with emotion, "that I have been waiting 500 years for this moment. For you. Then I'm glad I came." "So am I." He pulled her close again, and this time his embrace was gentle, protective. "So am I, my brave, impossible Elena." They stood together in the ruins of the battle, surrounded by broken gates and scattered weapons, while the castle servants began to emerge from hiding. There would be much to do, repairs to be made, defenses to be strengthened, preparations for whatever came next. But for now, in this moment, there was only the two of them, a monster learning to be human again, and a woman who had taught him how. The war was not over. Father Andre would return with reinforcements, with church authorities, with inquisitors, and professional hunters. The village would never fully accept what had happened here today, and the curse that bound Dracula to darkness remained unbroken, a constant threat to everything they might try to build together. But they had this moment, this victory, this impossible kiss that should never have happened but did, and somehow, impossibly, it was enough. Elena rested her head against Dracula's chest, listening to the silence where his heartbeat should have been, and thought that perhaps love did not need a heartbeat to be real. Perhaps it only needed courage and compassion and the willingness to see past the monster to the man beneath. Perhaps that was enough to save them both, or perhaps it was only enough to damn them together. Either way, she had made her choice, and she would not unmake it. Not for heaven, not for hell, not for all the priests and hunters in the world. She had kissed a vampire and found salvation in his cold embrace, and in the end, that was the only truth that mattered. 3 months passed in a strange, suspended peace. The castle, once a monument to isolation and darkness, transformed into something that almost resembled a home. Elena and Dracula worked side by side to repair the damage from the siege, mending gates, replacing shattered windows, clearing away the debris of battle. The servants, emboldened by their victory, moved through the halls with less fear and more purpose. Even old Gregor managed something that might have been a smile when he saw Elena and Dracula together. But peace, Elena had learned, was always temporary. The signs began slowly. Livestock in the villages started disappearing, not taken by wolves but drained of blood and left as pale husks. Travelers on the mountain roads reported seeing dark figures in the night, moving with inhuman speed. And then the deaths began. First, a woodcutter found dead in the forest, his throat torn open. Then a farmer, killed in his own barn. Then a young woman from Borgo, discovered in the town square at dawn with all the blood drained from her body. The villagers erupted in terror and fury. Father Andre's voice rose again, louder and more vehement than before. "I warned you," he thundered from his pulpit. "The demon count has broken his vow. He murders innocents while hiding behind his corrupted maiden. We must act before we are all destroyed." Elena heard the news from Maria, who had gone to the village to visit her family and returned pale and shaking. "They're saying terrible things, miss. They're saying the count has been hunting at night, that his promise meant nothing. Father Andre is gathering an army, a real one this time. Soldiers, hunters from across the region. They'll be here within a week." Dracula stood by the window of his study, his back rigid, his hands clenched behind him. Elena had never seen him look so defeated. "It wasn't you," she said firmly. "You've kept your vow. You haven't left the castle at night, haven't fed on anything but the animals Thomas brings you. Someone is framing you. Who? His voice was hollow. What other creature could drain bodies of blood so completely? Elena's mind raced. Then, suddenly, she remembered something from weeks ago. Father Andre's words during the siege. I will consult with higher authorities. What if he had done more than consult? What if he had brought something back with him? Something to prove once and for all that vampires were monsters beyond redemption. Another vampire, she breathed. Father Andre brought another vampire here. Dracula turned sharply. That would be madness. No priest would willingly unleash such a creature, unless he believed he could control it, unless he planned to destroy it immediately after it had served its purpose. Elena grabbed his arms, urgency flooding through her. Think about it. These murders only started after Andre left. They're too obvious, too theatrical. Bodies left in public places where they'll be found immediately. Someone wants you blamed. Dracula's eyes widened with realization. The West Wing. I forbade you from entering it, because that is where I keep the few artifacts from my past, including texts on vampire lore, on how they are created and controlled. If Andre had found such texts, he was already moving, racing through the corridors with Elena close behind. They burst into the West Wing, a part of the castle Elena had never seen. It was darker here, colder, filled with ancient furniture, covered in dust sheets and walls lined with locked trunks and sealed chests. One of the chests stood open, its lock broken, its contents scattered across the floor. Dracula knelt beside the scattered papers and books, his face growing paler with each passing moment. The Codex Sanguis, he whispered. It's gone. The book contains rituals for creating vampires, for binding them to a master's will, for... He stopped, his expression horrified. For transferring a curse from one being to another. What does that mean? He looked up at her, and she saw fear in his eyes. Real, genuine terror. It means Andre didn't just create a vampire. He created one specifically to take my place. Once I am destroyed, once the murders are blamed on me and I am gone, he can transfer my curse to his creature and then destroy it, claiming victory over the real monster. The villages will praise him as a hero, never knowing he manufactured the entire crisis. But why would anyone volunteer to become a vampire? They wouldn't, which means he found someone desperate, someone dying, someone he could manipulate with promises of salvation or revenge. Dracula stood, his jaw set with grim determination. We must find this creature before it kills again, before the army arrives and destroys us all. They searched throughout the night, scouring the forests and villages for any sign of the rogue vampire. Thomas and Gregor joined them, while Maria and the other servants fortified the castle against the coming siege. It was nearly dawn when they found it. The creature was hiding in an abandoned chapel on the border between Bran and Borgo, a place that had been desecrated and left to rot years ago. It huddled in the shadows, its form twisted and wrong, as if the transformation had been incomplete or badly done. When it saw them, it hissed, revealing fangs that seemed too large for its mouth. But what froze Elena's blood was the recognition in those tortured eyes. "Ivan," she whispered. The creature that had once been old Ivan from the mill lurched forward, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. "Elena, help me." Its voice was a grinding rasp, barely human. "Priest, promised, healing, promised, salvation, but this is hell." "What did he do to you?" Dracula stepped forward slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Dying, fever," he said. "Become like you, serve, short time, then released." Ivan's form shuddered, and his face contorted with pain. "But can't control hunger. So strong, kill, can't stop killing." "The ritual was incomplete," Dracula said, his voice filled with a pity that made Elena's heart ache. "He gave you the curse, but none of the control that comes with age. You are trapped between human and monster, with all the hunger and none of the strength to resist it." "Please," Ivan fell to his knees. "Kill me. Can't live like this." Elena wanted to look away, wanted to flee from this horror, but she forced herself to stay. This was what Andre had done in his righteousness, created suffering far worse than anything Dracula had ever inflicted. Dracula knelt before Ivan, his expression infinitely sad. "I can end this for you, old one. I can give you peace. But first, I need you to come with me, to show the people what Andre has done, to tell them the truth. Truth won't believe they will." Elena knelt beside them both. Ivan, I will make them believe, but we need you. Please, help us stop Andrei from doing this to anyone else. The tortured creature looked at her with eyes that held both agony and desperate hope. Slowly, it nodded. The army arrived 3 days later, just as predicted. But this time, Dracula and Elena were ready. They stood on the battlements with Ivan between them, the wretched, twisted thing that Father Andrei had created in his quest to prove monsters existed. The soldiers stopped at the gates, confused by the sight. Father Andrei pushed to the front, his face flushing with rage when he saw Ivan. What trickery is this? No trickery, priest. Dracula's voice rang out clear and cold. Only truth. This man came to you dying, and you promised him salvation. Instead, you used forbidden rituals to transform him into the very thing you claim to hate. You created these murders, sacrificed innocent lives, all to justify your crusade against me. Lies. That creature is your servant, not mine. Then why does he bear the mark of binding? Elena held up a pendant she had found on Ivan, a holy symbol inscribed with Andrei's name, the tool used to control the newly made vampire. This is your work, priest. Your evil. The soldiers murmured among themselves, uncertainty rippling through their ranks. Their captain, a grizzled veteran named Vasily, stepped forward. Is this true, Father? Did you create this thing? Father Andrei's face twisted with desperate fury. It was necessary, don't you see? I had to prove that all vampires are monsters, that even one who claims reform is lying. I did this for the good of... You did this for your own glory, Dracula interrupted. You wanted to be the hero who slew the monster, regardless of who had to die to make it happen. Ivan lurched forward, his voice a tortured wail. He lied to me, used me, made me kill children. The last word hung in the air like a curse. The soldiers drew back in horror and disgust, their weapons now turning toward the priest instead of the castle. No! Father Andrei pulled out a vial, more holy water, Elena assumed, and hurled it at Dracula. But the Count didn't move, and once again the water simply splashed harmlessly across his face. Your holy weapons have no power over someone who has genuinely chosen redemption, Dracula said quietly. I learned that the day Elena first touched me without fear, first saw me as something worth saving. Your God judges not what we are, but what we choose to do with what we are. And I choose mercy, even now, even for you. He turned to Captain Vasily. Take him. Try him for murder, for the creation of unholy creatures, for all the crimes he has committed in the name of righteousness. Let human law judge him, not my vengeance. The soldiers moved forward, surrounding the priest. Father Andrei screamed and fought, but his protests fell on deaf ears. He had been revealed for what he truly was, not a holy warrior, but a fanatic willing to create the very evil he claimed to destroy. As the soldiers dragged Andrei away, Ivan turned to Dracula with pleading eyes. Now, please, end this. Dracula nodded solemnly. He drew his sword, the same blade he had driven into the stone during the first siege, and held it before him. You will find peace, Ivan, I promise you that. Thank you. It was quick and merciful. Ivan's tortured form crumbled to dust, released at last from the agony of his incomplete transformation. Elena said a prayer over the ashes, and Gregor carefully gathered them for proper burial. Captain Vasily approached the battlements, looking up at Dracula with an expression that mixed respect with lingering wariness. The priest will be tried and likely executed for his crimes. As for you, Count, I cannot say the people will ever fully trust you. But today you have proven you are not the monster Andrei claimed. You have my word that no army will march against this castle again, not while I command. That is all I ask. Dracula bowed his head in acknowledgement. The soldiers left, taking their prisoner with them. Silence fell over the castle once more, but this time it felt different. Not the heavy silence of dread, but the quiet peace of a storm finally passed. Elena found Dracula in the library that evening, standing by the window and watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. She moved to stand beside him, taking his cold hand in hers. It's over, she said softly, for now. But his voice held more hope than she had ever heard in it. Elena, I have been thinking about what happened with Ivan, about the incomplete ritual, about the texts Andrei stole. What about them? He turned to face her, and his expression was both terrified and wondering. There was another text in that chest, one I have studied for centuries but never dared to attempt, a ritual for reversing the vampire curse, not transferring it but ending it completely. Elena's heart leaped. You could become human again? Perhaps. The ritual requires three things: the willing sacrifice of a vampire's immortality, the freely given love of a mortal soul, and— he hesitated. Price. The ritual would drain the life force from both participants. I would become mortal, but I would age rapidly. Catching up to the years I should have lived, I would have perhaps a day, maybe two, before death claimed me. And me? You would survive. Weakened, aged by a handful of years, but alive. He cupped her face in his hands. But it would mean giving up any future we might have had. A day or two of mortality in exchange for the years we could have had together. Elena thought about it. Really thought about it. She could stay here, remain as his companion, spend years or even decades with him in this twilight existence between life and death. Or she could give him one true day of humanity, one sunset and sunrise as a mortal man, knowing it would be his last. How many sunsets have you seen in 500 years? She asked. None. The sun burns my kind. I have not felt its warmth on my face since the day I was transformed. Then we do the ritual. Her voice was firm, certain. You deserve to feel the sun again. You deserve one day of true life, even if it's all you ever get. Elena, think about what you're saying. I have thought about it. She pulled his hands to her heart, letting him feel its beating. You taught me that even monsters can choose mercy. Let me teach you that even one day of real life is worth centuries of shadowed existence. Let me give you this gift, as you gave my brother his life. Dracula looked at her with such love and anguish that she thought her heart would break. I do not deserve you. Stop saying that, she smiled through tears. You deserve everything. Let me prove it to you. The ritual took 3 days to prepare. They gathered the necessary components: rare herbs, crystals charged with moonlight, vials of Dracula's blood mixed with Elena's tears. The servants helped without question, understanding that something profound was happening, something that would change everything. On the evening of the 3rd day, as the full moon rose over the mountains, they performed the ritual in the castle's highest tower. Dracula and Elena stood within a circle of candles, their hands clasped, ancient words of power spoken in languages older than memory. The transformation was agony. Elena felt her life force flowing out of her, pouring into Dracula like water into a vessel. She saw his skin flush with color, saw warmth return to his features, saw the black depths of his eyes lighten to brown. She heard his heart begin to beat. Once, twice, a rhythm that grew stronger with each passing moment, and she saw him weep, not tears of blood, but real tears, human tears, as 500 years of suppressed emotion finally broke free. When it ended, they collapsed together on the floor of the tower, exhausted but alive. Elena felt older, heavier, as if the years she had given him weighed on her bones. But Dracula was transformed. He looked younger now, closer to the 35 years he had been when cursed. His skin was warm and flushed, his eyes bright with tears and wonder. His chest rose and fell with breath, real, necessary breath. His heart beat strong and steady, a rhythm Elena could hear without pressing close. I can feel it, he whispered in amazement. Everything. The cold of the stone, the warmth of the candles, the ache in my muscles. I'm tired. I'm hungry. He laughed, a sound of pure joy. I'm alive. Elena managed a weak smile. How does it feel? Like coming home after being lost for eternity. He gathered her into his arms, and his embrace was warm for the first time, solid and real and beautifully human. Thank you, my brave, impossible, beautiful Elena. They spent the rest of the night simply being together, talking, laughing, crying, marveling at the gift they had been given. As dawn approached, they climbed to the eastern tower, the one that faced the sunrise. Dracula had never seen a sunrise, not as a man, and certainly not in all his centuries as a vampire. Now as the sky began to lighten from black to deep blue to pale gold, he stood with Elena wrapped in his arms and waited with the anticipation of a child. The sun rose over the mountains in glory. Its light touched them both, and Dracula gasped, not in pain, but in wonder. The warmth of it washed over his face, and he lifted his hands to the light, watching it play across his skin without burning, without destroying. It's beautiful, he breathed, more beautiful than I remembered. They stood together and watched the sun climb higher, painting the world in colors Dracula had almost forgotten existed. Elena felt his heart beat against her back, steady and strong and mortal. I love you, she said softly. and I love you." He turned her to face him, his warm hands cradling her face. "In 500 years, I never thought I would speak those words again, never thought I would feel them. But you made me human again, not just in body, but in soul." He kissed her then, and this time there was no coldness, no distance, no careful control. This was the kiss of a living man, warm and desperate, and full of all the love he had denied himself for centuries. They made love as the sun rose higher, the light streaming through the tower windows to bathe them in gold. It was gentle and passionate, reverent and wild, everything Elena had imagined, and nothing she could have prepared for. In Dracula's arms, she felt cherished and desired, precious beyond measure. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the warm light, Dracula traced patterns on her skin and spoke of the life he wished they could have had, children, grandchildren, growing old together, all the simple human joys he had lost so long ago. "We have today," Elena reminded him, "and perhaps tomorrow. That's more than many people ever get." "It is." He kissed her forehead, "and I will treasure every moment." They spent the day living, truly living. They walked in the gardens feeling real earth beneath their feet and real sun on their faces. They ate a meal together, and Dracula wept again at the taste of bread and wine, sensations he had thought lost forever. They laughed at silly things, cried at beautiful ones, and loved each other with the fierce intensity of those who know their time is short. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, they returned to the tower. Elena felt Dracula begin to weaken, his breathing growing more labored, his movements slower. "It's starting," he said quietly. "The years are catching up." She held him tighter, refusing to let fear steal this last precious time. "Then we'll watch the sunset together, and the stars come out, and the moon rise. We'll make every moment count. We already have." He smiled at her, and even as his face grew lined with age, even as white streaked through his dark hair, his eyes remained young and full of love. "You gave me life, Elena. Real life, not the pale shadow I existed in for so long. You gave me redemption. You gave me peace. You gave me purpose," she replied. "You taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. You showed me that anyone can change. Anyone can choose to be better if they're willing to pay the price." They sat together as night fell, and the stars emerged like diamonds scattered across velvet. Dracula's breathing grew shallow, his heartbeat irregular, but his hand never left hers, and his eyes never stopped looking at her with wonder and gratitude. "Tell me," he whispered as the moon rose, "in all your life, did you ever imagine loving a monster?" "No," Elena said honestly. "But then I never imagined finding such perfect humanity in someone the world called inhuman. I never imagined that a creature of darkness would teach me what it truly means to walk in light." "I never imagined," he echoed, "that a peasant girl with mud on her shoes and hope in her heart would save my damned soul. And yet here we are. Here we are." Dracula took one last, shuddering breath, his eyes closed, a peaceful smile on his lips, and his heartbeat stilled. Elena held him as he died, not with tears of despair, but with quiet gratitude for the miracle they had been given. She held him as his body grew cold once more, as the warmth of life faded back into the chill of death. But this time, it was not the unnatural cold of undeath, but the simple stillness of a man who had finally, peacefully come to rest. The servants found them at dawn, Elena still holding Dracula's body, still whispering prayers and words of love. They buried him in the castle gardens, in a spot where the sun would touch his grave every morning, a place of warmth and light and life. Elena stayed in the castle for the rest of her days. She was welcomed as its lady, its guardian, its memory keeper. She taught the village children to read, helped the servants tend the gardens, and kept the library in perfect order. She told stories of the Count who had been a monster and became a man, who had chosen mercy over vengeance and love over darkness. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the moon was full and the wolves sang their songs, she would climb to the eastern tower and remember. She would remember dancing in the music room, dining by candlelight, those long conversations about philosophy and humanity and hope. She would remember his cold touch that became warm, his dark eyes that learned to weep, his damaged soul that found redemption in her arms. She would remember the kiss that saved them both. Years later, when Elena herself lay dying, surrounded by the chosen family she had built from servants and villagers who had learned to trust rather than fear, her last words were a whisper, meant for ears that could no longer hear them. "I never kissed a vampire," she said, smiling through her final tears, "but I loved one, and he taught me that love can transform even the darkest curse into the most beautiful blessing." Then her eyes closed, her breathing stilled, and Elena Novak joined Dracula in whatever peace awaited beyond the darkness. But in the castle, in the library he had loved, and the gardens she had tended, their story lived on. And the villagers who had once feared the dark castle on the mountain came to see it as a monument to something else entirely, a testament to the power of compassion over hatred, mercy over vengeance, and love over even the most terrible curse. The castle still stands today, silent and peaceful, its gates open to travelers who need shelter, its gardens blooming with roses and thorns. And on quiet nights when the moon is full, some say you can hear music drifting from the tower windows, a waltz played on an invisible gramophone, and the sound of laughter that might be ghosts, or might be memory, or might be the echo of a love that transcended death itself. For in the end, that is what endures. Not the darkness, not the curse, not the fear, but the love, always the love. The end.